Buenos días a todos. En nombre de INECO y de la Fundación INECO les agradecemos a todos por su tiempo. Son días intensos por diferentes motivos, uno de ellos fin de año. Y bueno, valoro y valoramos el esfuerzo de estar acá que hicieron todos ustedes, pero la ocasión lo amerita. Es un gran privilegio tener este speaker hoy, y no voy a hablar del invitado porque lo va a presentar Iván. Voy a hablar de cómo en la Argentina, en los últimos años o décadas, creció la economía del comportamiento, unidades de Behavioral Insight. Fue el esfuerzo básicamente de algunos investigadores e investigadoras que veían que en Inglaterra, en Estados Unidos, los gobiernos se apalancaban en cómo los seres humanos nos comportamos, decidimos, actuamos en la realidad para diseñar mejores políticas públicas y para implementar mejores políticas públicas. Y desde Fundación INECO, liderado por Fernando Torrente y otros investigadores e investigadoras, se creó la primera unidad de comportamiento, de economía del comportamiento en la Argentina. Luego el gobierno, liderado por Iván desde el gobierno, desde la Casa Rosada, de la oficina del presidente de la Nación, se creó una oficina de economía del comportamiento. Uruguay creo que está trabajando en esto o ya ha oficializado su unidad. Creo que Brasil también está trabajando en esto. Pero bueno, muestra cómo el impulso de la sociedad, el impulso de la sociedad civil en temas como este pueden ser imitados por los gobiernos. Lamentablemente, una de las cosas que todos padecemos en la Argentina es la falta de política de Estado. Y en este momento, como también pasó en Estados Unidos, cuando Obama lo llama a Cass para que cree la unidad del comportamiento, luego esto en el gobierno de Trump creo que no se siguió. Acá estamos viviendo un momento similar de que no se continúe esta unidad de comportamiento desde la Casa Rosada, lo cual es un problema para esta área, lamentablemente, para el país, porque se me pueden mejorar las políticas públicas, pero también habla de la falta de consistencia en política de Estado, en consensos, que es lo que necesita Argentina. Así que, habiendo dicho esto, y este marco muy breve del área, de cómo creció el área en la Argentina, es obvio que significa muchísimo para nosotros que esté Cass hoy hablándonos sobre sus últimos pensamientos e investigaciones, que estén líderes de Argentina y de la región acá también, y por streaming viéndonos. La verdad que es un privilegio, es un momento mágico, y entre tanto estrés e intensidad permitámonos un rato de bienestar y placer. Bueno, le voy a dar la palabra a Iván para que introduzca a Cass. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias al doctor Manes por la introducción y también por permitirnos que vengamos a pensar junto al doctor Sunstein. Let's switch to English. Well, first of all, we have to apologize that as Cass was so kind that when he informed me that he's coming to Buenos Aires to have some official duties, but with his family, I asked him in a very shy way if he can have a talk with us. He said, well, no problem. So we begin running and see how we can organize this. And because the time of the year we couldn't have simultaneous translation, so we have to conduct this event in English, so we apologize for that. And for my particular Tarzan style of English speaking. Well, we're so honored to have Professor Sunstein here. Perhaps many of us don't know that Dr. Sunstein is a man of many trades. He's a kind of Renaissance man that have a very broad interest in almost everything, every aspect of human life. He's incredible in the sense that he has wrote, I count more or less 65 books, and I searched him in Wikipedia. He's more than 600 peer-reviewed articles. This year alone, perhaps you can correct me, I saw that he's publishing or has published 7 books. And let's see the wideness of his interest. One book is called How to Become Famous. Lost Instance, Taylor Swift, he's also right about Taylor Swift. Let me repeat the title. How to Become Famous, Lost Instance, Taylor Swift, That Weren't, and How the Beatles Came to Be. This is a book that deals that which certain things sometimes lack, sometimes behavioral aspects that make people famous. I have to say that he also wrote articles from, I think, a Liverpool-based journal of the Beatles. And he also wrote an entire book of Star Wars. So let's continue with his book. With the lovely Tali Sharot, he has another book in print that's called Look Again. The Power of Noticing was what was always there. For us interested in behavioral sciences, we really know that some things, sometimes we don't realize what we have in front of our eyes. That's the object of this second book. The third book, with Patrick Mickelson, Default Nudges. We lawyers know a lot about the importance, the quantitative importance of default. We all remember that classical chart of Nuts with Taylor, the book he wrote with Taylor about transplant, how revolutionary it was. Another book, Decisions About Decision, Practical Reasons in Ordinary Life, Why People Decide How They Decide, another interesting topic of behavioral sciences. How to interpret the Constitution for us lawyers. In the turmoil, the Supreme Court of the US is right now with change of the majority to more conservative views about abortion, about environmental laws, about the power of the federal agencies. Again, a book so deep, so interesting, challenging the now prevalent view of originalism in the court of the US. Another book, Boundary Rationality. He took Herbert Simon teachings about that, and he deepens what was said 60 or 70 years ago in a very interesting way. Another one, and this is very, very close to our hearts as lawyers, he is writing a behavioral analysis of law book. He also had another one, but he was the editor. Now he wrote an entire book on that in 1 year. How many of us would love to have this production in our whole life? But the thing is that he's not also an academic. He was, as he used to say, in the cockpit of the administrative state. He was in charge of the OIRA, the administrative, let me see the formal name, the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, where he oversaw every regulation issued in the United States, every major and important regulation. Again, he also, well, he was dubbed the most dangerous man in America because, by a conservative commentator, because he was trying to encourage some kind of good regulation on using behavioral tools for good. He taught 27 years at Chicago. Now he has a tenured professor in Harvard Law School. He was, I don't know if you can conclude that you are a professional squash player, but he plays squash at a professional level. And he's interested in a myriad of other things. But He wrote hundreds of articles because he's also a polemist and he wants to not to be in the ivory tower of academia. He wants to engage in the political debate. He was a very close friend, I think, from the Chicago years with former President Obama, and now he's an advisor to President Biden. But perhaps what pains himself the most is what a very close friend of him, Richard Thaler, Nobel Prize 2017, and co-author of the book, famous book, Nudge. Let me quote how he portrays Cass. He says, in the world of academic law, Cass is a rock star. Although normally in his book, remember, it's a very funny book, The Misbehaving of Thaler. In the world of academic law, Cass is a rock star. Although normally his specialty is constitutional law, and I have to say, an administrative law, he has written articles and books on nearly every branch of law and is widely admired. His enthusiasm is catching, and his encyclopedic knowledge is astonishing. At some point, I suggested that we should consider asking Cass to join our behavioral insights team. For us Argentinians, hear what Thaler says in 2016. Adding Cass to your research team is a bit like adding Lionel Messi to your pickup soccer game. So, if you come here right now, because what we want to do from all our team, as you are the Lionel Messi of behavioral sciences, we want to give you a Lionel Messi t-shirt. So, thanks a lot. The lectern is yours. Thank you very much, Cass. Here you have the water and a glass. And let me, it's there. Okay. I'm going to put water here.
Should I wear this? Would that make my words seem more authoritative?
If you want to walk, you can pick up that.
I think I'm okay from here. Okay, how's the audio? Perfect. Thank you for indulging my English. Yo hablo un poco español, solamente un poco. Did I get that right? And the generosity and kindness that I've experienced in my short time here is extraordinary, and I'm most grateful. I've followed with admiration and a sense of wonder the behavioral work that's been done in Argentina over the last years, both the academic work and the applied work. Thank you for that. It's an inspiration to people all over the world who are observing and learning from what you've done. And I was asked just a few minutes ago why I chose to come after Christmas to Buenos Aires with my family. And the answer is there a more beautiful city on the planet? Is there a more amazing city on the planet? I have two stories for you about Sludge. I'm here in my academic capacity. I also work in the U.S. government at the Department of Homeland Security. And a few weeks ago, I got a call from a very important person in Washington who doesn't work for the government and who is not an American citizen. And what this very important person wanted was help in getting a visa for a teenage boy who was her son. And he didn't have the right visa for something very important for the family's life. And I said I couldn't help because for ethical reasons, if you work for the government, you're not allowed to help individuals. And the person who asked me for help was not grateful for my answer, which was I wasn't able to help. She was surprised and disappointed. And she's a friend, and we had a lengthy conversation about why I couldn't help. And at the end of the conversation, she asked, well, what should I do? It's too hard. I can't figure it out. And I thought and said, hire a lawyer. She called me the next day and said the lawyer figured it out and solved her problem. It took him 10 minutes. And then she said, what about all the other thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who have a problem similar to mine, who don't know that one should hire a lawyer and who don't know which lawyer to hire? What about them? That's a good question. My second story is about law students. I was at a university a year ago, and I'm not going to name the university, but it's in North America. You'll see in a moment why I'm not going to name the university. I was having lunch with a group of law students, and I asked them, do you have any problems with your medical situation at your university? Is it working well or is it difficult? And one of them said, well, it's mostly good, but I struggle, he said, with depression, and I tried to get some help for my mental health problem, and I made 6 phone calls, and at every phone call they told me to make another phone call, and at the 7th phone call they told me to make 3 more phone calls, and at that point I was getting really depressed, and I gave up. And he said it with humor, but also with a sense of disbelief. And then another student, a woman in the small group, said, well, you have a problem of depression. I have a different problem. My problem is anxiety. And I tried to get help for anxiety. I made the same 6 phone calls, and then my anxiety was completely out of control, and I gave up. Okay, that helped inspire these remarks, which are on the topic of sludge. Here's an executive order with the charming and unforgettable name, Executive Order 14058. Will you remember that for the rest of your life because it's so behaviorally intelligent? 14058. It comes from President Biden, and it is directed at 17 agencies: the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, 17 of them, and it calls out time taxes. The basic idea is that the government imposes time taxes on citizens, and I understand that this is an issue in Argentina, as it is in Russia and France and Italy and Colombia, where citizens are asked to spend time managing processes, like my friend in Washington and the law students. The executive order combines 2 ideas, trust and customer service, and insists that trust is compromised by poor customer services. It emphasizes the centrality of behavioral science to the earning of trust and the improvement of customer service, and it has an amazing list of initiatives and reforms. We're going to get to them with specificity. If we are looking at behavioral science under the Star-Spangled Banner in the last 3 years, this is where to find it. Okay, guess how many hours in paperwork burdens the United States government imposes on people? 11 billion hours. If you took every citizen of Chicago and locked them in a room, man, woman, and child, and said, for the next 365 days, you must spend the entire week filling out federal forms, at the end of that cruel exercise, we're not going to do it, you would not come close to the 11 billion hour figure imposed by the United States government. A question is, what is the equivalent number in Argentina, in Germany, in Denmark, in Saudi Arabia? It would be very good to know, wouldn't it? Okay, now let's get, with your indulgence, a little academic. In my view, some of the most exciting behavioral work in the last 20 years explores the problem of cognitive scarcity. Not economic scarcity, but cognitive scarcity. Right now in this room, there are many things happening. Someone just coughed. Did you hear? We arranged this in advance, this cough, so as to illustrate the point. There are lights that you could count. There are visually interesting things here. The number of things on which each of us is focusing, I hope, is a small subset of the number of things that are happening in the room. By God's grace, perhaps you're even listening to me. This is cognitive scarcity in the mind. If someone is busy, lonely, hungry, sick, or poor, the problem of scarcity is amplified. A busy professor, or economist, or neuroscientist, or administrator, or student, or professor will be able to focus only on a small subset of the things that are actually mattering to that person's life. If you are lonely, the thing that you will focus on is how do I get friends, which is not the best emotional state to have when you're trying to get friends. Doesn't make you particularly likable. It's a little desperate. But lonely people are focusing on their friendlessness. If I put on the screen the following letters, D, C, A, E, K, L, R, T, and ask you to come up with words out of those letters, if you're hungry, and I hope you're not, you will see very visibly and almost immediately the word C-A-K-E, cake. Hungry people see in letter combinations food words almost immediately because they are focused like a laser on the fact that they need food. If you are sick, the number of things that you can focus on in your illness is limited and might be focused essentially on the fact that you're not feeling well. Can I tell you about an example of the power of cognitive scarcity? A few years ago, I worked with a doctor to ask people to take a kind of intelligence test in a doctor's office before they were having their checkup. These weren't people who were sick, but they were focused. They were about to have their annual checkup. The people performed less well on this intelligence test than any group of people in human history has ever performed on this intelligence test. They weren't stupid people. They weren't people who lacked intelligence. They were just thinking, I'm about to have a medical checkup. And that made it very hard for them to perform well on an intelligence test. If you are poor, chances are the thing you're going to focus on is your economic situation, and your ability to focus on things outside of that economic situation is extremely limited. That means that people who are poor will suffer diminution both in their fluid intelligence and in their capacity for self-control, not for any reason other than the fact that they are suffering from poverty. The word elderly isn't on this slide, but I have a story about scarcity and old age. In some work on the problem of sludge, there's a tale of an elderly man in his 80s asked to fill out forms that are lengthy and complicated to qualify for benefits, and the combination of anger and mischief he's charming, explodes from the page in which he says, I'm 87 years old. You're asking me to fill out 20 pages of complicated forms at the age of 87? If I was 50, I could do it. But now you're asking me? Okay. If you are suffering from cognitive scarcity, there are two good things that happen. One is you are tunneling on the task at hand. Have you ever been in a meeting that is a half an hour meeting and 20 minutes in, nothing has been accomplished? Is that familiar? In the last 10 minutes, much of the time, people tunnel. It's as if they're in a little tunnel and they have to get to daylight. The last 10 minutes are often crucial. When I was in the White House, I changed all the half-hour meetings that I led to 15-minute meetings, and I changed all the hour meetings that I led to half-an-hour meetings. People were a little startled by this innovation, but I did it because I wanted them to tunnel on the topic of the meeting, and if we needed more than 15 minutes, we'd take it. But frequently, the fact that it was a 15-minute meeting would mean that everything would be accomplished within the 15 minutes. Tunneling is very good. There is a focused dividend from cognitive scarcity. Poor people often do not show behavioral biases that rich people do show with respect to money. It's because they are focusing intensely on expected value, and a heuristic that might lead to errors on the part of people who are poor, poor people won't make because they're focused. And their system two, their deliberative system, is operating in full force, whereas someone who doesn't have a money struggle, their system one will be making the assessment. But there are two very bad things that accompany scarcity. One is present bias, where the future is a foreign country. People aren't sure they're going to visit it. Let's call it Laterland. They're not sure they're ever going to go to Laterland. And that means that long-term costs and benefits will loom very small. There's a cartoon in the New Yorker magazine of the world as seen by a New Yorker. And in the cartoon, there's Manhattan, and it's really big. Then there's Brooklyn, and it's big. Then there's Los Angeles, and it's pretty small. Then there's China, and it's very, very small. Then there's Europe, and it's also very, very small. For the New Yorker, Manhattan and Brooklyn big, other parts of the world barely visible. For present bias people, that's how time is. If you are suffering from cognitive scarcity, there's a bandwidth tax that any new task imposes, and sometimes a bandwidth tax is unbearable. Of course, that makes planning really difficult. Okay, we know that if you are hungry, you will see things that look like food, even if they are just letters that are symbolic of food. If we took, let's say, the poorest people in this nation and asked them to take an intelligence test, the best prediction is they'd do pretty well. They wouldn't do less well than people who aren't very poor, or if they do less well, they do just a little less well. It wouldn't be a big difference. But then if we took the poorest people in Argentina and asked them first to solve an economic problem that they personally face, let's say it involves some sort of increase in cost, inflation, or let's say it involves something involving their automobile or their children, and ask them to take an intelligence test after being asked to solve an economic problem, their intelligence goes down very dramatically. It goes down as much as one's intelligence goes down on an intelligence test if one has had no sleep the night before, none. If you ask people who aren't poor to solve an economic problem and then to take an intelligence test, it has no impact, none. That's because if poor people are asked to solve an economic problem, which they're asked to do a lot, their ability to focus on other things is sharply diminished, which means their fluid intelligence is lower. The same thing happens to their executive function, their capacity to exercise self-control. Okay, imagine being a parent of 3 small children in circumstances in which you're struggling with poverty. Your ability to exercise self-control and to engage in, let's say, deliberative problem solving is compromised. That will have adverse consequences for economic growth, and it will also have adverse consequences for equity. What do you have to do in Chile or in Italy to hire someone? In the United States, there's a program, maybe familiar, au pair program, where people come in from diverse nations and they help out with children. This is very good for working women in particular, and it's a basically very successful program. There's a proposal from our State Department which dramatically increases the administrative burdens that accompany hiring an au pair. It's not finalized, it's a proposal. The concern on the part of people who benefit from the au pair proposal, including au pair, is that the sludge associated with employment will decrease employment and have significant adverse effects. This is a behavioral objection to well-motivated efforts to ensure that people who are hired are being hired in a way that is fair and appropriate. There may be something bad that will follow. Okay, there is no movie called Scarcity Meets Sludge, and the chance that there will eventually be such a movie is very low. Could we get Isabelle Huppert to star in that movie? You know Isabelle Huppert? She's a very good actress. I think she won't appear in that movie. In any case, this would be an instructive movie. Here's some data. Here's some breaking news. This is a stunning paper that just appeared approximately a week ago. I had to redo the slides this morning. Iván will attest to include this empirical finding. Here's a program, and you can think of this as just a government program. It could be a program for building. It could be a program for hiring. It could be a program for anything at all. This is a program for poor people, and the basic idea is to get the benefit, poor people have to have an interview to make sure they're eligible. They have to have an interview. The behaviorally informed intervention was to tell the applicants, you can schedule the interview when it suits you. We won't schedule the interview for you. You can say, I want to do it on Tuesday, not Friday. It was randomized, so a large group, about 30,000 people, were told, you can schedule the interview when it suits you. The other 30,000, the interview was scheduled for them. The startling finding is that the flexible interview alternative increased approvals by 6 percentage points, doubled early approvals, and increased long-term participation by over 2 percentage points. Now we're talking about large numbers of people, not massive in percentages, but large numbers of people who are poor who get food that they would otherwise not get through this remarkably modest effort at reducing sludge, where the sludge is an interview requirement. Okay, here's something from 2018. In Michigan, low-income students get to go for free to the University of Michigan. All you need to know to understand this, you may know already, which is the University of Michigan is one of our great universities. It's an extraordinary university. If you go to the University of Michigan, you are very lucky. Low-income students get to go for free. Wealthy students or moderate, medium-income students, they have to pay. It's not a lot, but they have to pay. Here's the intervention. Students and their parents were told, please apply, you get free tuition, and you don't have to pay any fees upon admission. What they were told was publicly available. It wasn't new information. It's something that is on the website. It's completely accessible. The result of telling people something that's a little like dropped objects fall or the earth goes around the sun was to double the likelihood of application, double the likelihood of enrollment by poor students at the University of Michigan. And that effect persisted for 2 years. That closed by half the income gap in college choice among Michigan's high-achieving students. This is about equity and poverty reduction and even employment. If we're talking about economic growth, there are parallels for small and large companies which face something like an information gathering burden. We have, regrettably, in the United States, a problem of gun homicides. You've read about that, yes? Guns, people getting killed. Sludge, in the form of a 2 to 5 day waiting period law, you can't get a gun for 2 to 5 days, reduces gun homicides by about 17%. We're talking about hundreds of people who don't get killed because of a small policy that decreases people's ability to get a gun today. They have to wait a little bit. Okay, in North America, millions of low-income people fail to get tax benefits. That's millions. In a recent year, more than 2.4 million infants in the United States were eligible for a beneficial program. 80% failed to participate, and 50% of eligible pregnant women were not covered. Those are numbers, but they are avoidable human tragedies. And I'm wondering with keen curiosity what kind of parallels there are here. Occupational licensing and permit requirements are all over North and South America. They impose obstacles to economic growth. Education sludge is a problem for would-be and actual students. It's a problem for mental health. Building things is often made very difficult by virtue of sludge, understood as frictions and administrative burdens. Because we're all becoming friends now, can I tell you a story from the White House? You want to hear a story from the White House? Early on in the Obama administration, I called public officials from one of our departments, ministries, to come over to the White House to discuss how we could improve development processes by making it easier for people to build. That's good for poor people, it's good for rich people, it's good for our infrastructure is far from perfect. How can we make it easier for people to build? It was an hour meeting. This was not a short meeting. Half an hour into the meeting, it occurred to me that everything they were saying was about how they couldn't do anything to reduce the administrative burdens imposed on people who wanted to build. It was as if the purpose of the meeting was to explain why nothing could be changed. And I heard myself as the professor newcomer saying, the purpose of the meeting is not to explain why nothing can be changed. It's to increase economic development. I didn't say that in the happiest mood. And now in 2023, almost 2024, North America isn't where it should be on this. Okay, here's an academic paper with the best title, I believe, of any academic paper ever written. It's Everyone Believes in Redemption. It's a good title, isn't it? It's a Catholic title, but it appeals to people of all religious convictions and who lack religious convictions. Everyone believes in redemption. And take this as a little experiment that is instructive about the adverse effects of sludge. There are many companies which will tell you, buy this product, mail in this form, and we'll send you some money back. So when I bought my iPhone, they told me if you mail in a form, you will get approximately $100 back. And I thought, that's great. And guess whether I mailed in the form? No. Guess whether I lost the form? Yes. Guess whether I'm still looking for the form? Yes. I have no idea where it is. Here's what the paper finds, that people believe the probability that they or others will mail in the form is very high. The actual probability that they will mail in the form is not very high. Redemption in this study occurred 30% of the time. People believed that they would redeem, the likelihood was about 80% that they would redeem. Here are 3 behaviorally informed interventions to reduce that difference. First is to remind people, mail in the form or you are going to lose the money. Second, information on what other groups have done. And third, make it simpler to mail in the form. I'm very curious if we took 1,000 behavioral scientists and asked them the impact of each of these behaviorally informed interventions, whether the behavioral scientists would get it right. I confess I would not have gotten it right. I would have predicted that all 3 would have a significant impact and that 1 or 3 would be the largest in impact and they would be roughly equivalent. What do you think would happen? What's your guess? Here's the data. Reminders had no impact at all. Information about what the previous groups did had no impact at all. Sludge reduction increased the mail-in rate by a lot. Reducing the burden of mailing in the form had a major impact. Shall I tell you parenthetically about the most powerful behaviorally informed intervention I know about? It's a cousin to this. Will you indulge me? It's from Washington, D.C. There's a technology, an educational technology, which if parents get it on their phone, the educational performance of their children gets much better. They go to school more, they get better grades, they get better evaluations. Everything gets better if they get the technology. The reason is the technology informs parents when something's going well or badly with their child. And this is the District of Columbia Public Schools, where a lot of the children are struggling in life, and so it's very important to have the technology. The school put on the website basically what I just told you and told the parents, if you want to enroll, just go to the website and click and you can enroll. Guess what percentage of the parents enrolled? 1%. 1 out of 100. The school didn't like that very much. So with the help of behavioral scientists, they changed it so people got a reminder on their cell phone saying, click and you're in. Click and you got the technology. The percentage went up 800% from 1% to 8%. That's very impressive, but it's terrible. 92% aren't in. The third approach was to say you're automatically in. If you don't want to be in, click, and you won't have the technology anymore on your phone. Over 95% stayed in. Now the footnote is the educational authorities, whose business it is to understand this kind of thing, were wildly off. They greatly overestimated the percentage that would enroll without the automatic enrollment, and they greatly underestimated the percentage who would enroll with the automatic enrollment. So the experts weren't informed. Okay, why is it that people don't redeem? Their belief that they will is unrealistic optimism and the planning fallacy. Their failure to redeem is a product of present bias and inertia. They think they will mail in the form tomorrow. And the data support the fact that the cost of mailing in the form isn't very salient to people at the time they receive the form. The fact that they actually have to do something that's a little annoying is not salient to them. Okay, we now know that there's 11 billion hours in annual paperwork burdens imposed by our agencies. Here's the result of our sludge audit. The Department of Health and Human Services, 695 million annual hours. The Department of Education, 90 million hours. The Department of Labor, 144 million hours. And if I'm boring you a little bit with these numbers, let's take the winner on this slide, the Department of Education, which has done the least. This means students, administrators, medical personnel at universities, professors, most poignantly professors, have to deal with 90 million hours in paperwork burdens annually. That's terrible. We could imagine a sludge audit here. It could be formal, as in the one you just heard. It could be more informal or impressionistic. That could be done in 2 months. It could be comprehensive or partial. And action might follow with a slogan I have from President Obama, who would say in the Oval Office when his officials were daunted by the magnitude of problems, maybe poverty, maybe unemployment, maybe climate change, maybe economic growth, what President Obama would say is, better is good. Meaning, if you could help the lives of 400 people, that's good. If you can't help the lives of 1 million people, if you can help the lives of 10,000 people, better is good. That was maybe the most important lesson I learned in the White House. Okay, we have to define sludge a little bit here. Frictions stemming from paperwork or other requirements. Time standing in line is sludge. A form is sludge. Having to go somewhere is sludge. Having to figure something out is sludge. You can think of sludge as a subset of transaction costs. It is a kind of transaction cost which raises a question about its relationship to nudge. Take this as an effort to distinguish between low friction and high friction impositions that can be good or bad. The good ones are well-motivated efforts to improve public or human welfare. The bad ones are sometimes described as dark patterns by which people are manipulated by self-interested private actors, or impositions by governments which may be well or not so well motivated. Low friction that's good is simplification, automatic enrollment in a good plan, an airport map that makes it really easy for you to find your way. High friction that's good is a deliberation promoting nudge, as in, are you sure you want to send this pretty unpleasant email to your spouse? Maybe not. The AI tells you. Are you sure you want to delete all your files because you're in a very bad mood, or maybe you want to think about it? Are you sure you want to buy a product that's very, very expensive and for which you have no need? That's good. A cooling off period before doing something reckless is a deliberation promoting nudge. Harmful make-it-easy nudges are things that make it very simple for you to enroll in a terrible, not good program, and maybe make it hard for you to get out. Is this a familiar thing? Sludge, think of as form-filling nightmares, long waiting times for driver's licenses or visas, things that make it take many months for people to get somewhere. I was told, by the way, for people here to get a visa for the United States is very time-consuming and delayed. That's a terrible thing for both our countries, and it's not built into the structure of the universe that that should be the case. That's a sludge problem. Okay, here are some reasons why administrative burdens might be justifiable. The most interesting reason for sludge is to promote reflection and deliberation. There's some empirical work saying waiting to choose actually promotes System 2 thinking. That's not surprising, but it's important. Abortion is a complicated case. There are many disputes, of course, moral disputes about abortion, but some people who are pro-life will say, I'm not sure I want to ban abortion, but I do want to strengthen women's deliberative capacity before they choose abortion. And let's just say that's an honorable position, whether one endorses it or not. The idea of promoting reflection and deliberation is a course for, let's call it, behaviorally informed policy 3.0, and we're only at early stages of investigating it. The most important defense of sludge or administrative burdens involves program integrity. The basic idea might be that there are programs that are available to some subset of the population, and we want to make sure that people who aren't eligible for the programs are not getting access to the programs. If you have sludge that's designed to ensure that only people who deserve a permit to build get a permit to build, that's great. That's a good defense. Sometimes governments impose sludge to acquire useful data. Sometimes they impose sludge to ensure that there's consent, that they're not getting your data without your saying yes. And sometimes they are imposing an ordeal as a sorting mechanism. It turns out to be a very not good sorting mechanism, that the people who are burdened by sludge and sorted out are typically the people who are most deserving and needy, not least deserving. But in principle, it could be a good sorting mechanism. Okay, let's get practical, shall we? There's a current stock of sludge, and there's a current flow of sludge. We could have an effort to eliminate the stock. My understanding is that's something the current government is interested in doing. Yes, reducing the current stock. And that could happen through a vague standard. Let's have a significant reduction, or a specific requirement, eliminate a certain number of hours. It could occur through specific program reform, through annual rather than quarterly reporting, electronic rather than paper reporting, and pre-population of forms. Pre-population is an underrated word. I'd love to hear the Spanish equivalent. It's when you go in the US government as a public official, by the way, as I relearned recently, the number of questions you have to answer is unbelievably high, like every country you've ever visited, and you may have forgotten some of them. Some parts of the form are pre-populated. They're already there. That is a blessing. For the flow, we might want a cost-benefit test to try to ensure the burden imposed on people is justified by the benefits it creates. The Department of Homeland Security has an entity in it, USCIS, which is Citizenship and Immigration Services. In 2021, it issued a public notice, a behaviorally informed public notice, asking the world, what are the barriers and burdens that are imposed that maybe are excessive? You might have expected there would be dozens of comments, or even hundreds of comments. There were over 7,000 comments, many of them excellent, with people saying, here's a requirement imposed on people that is doing no good for those people or anyone else. Please take it away. Here's a prohibition on people that is not serving any goal that anyone cares about. Eliminate it. And public officials poured over every one of those 7,000 comments and responded often by saying, you're right, we'll take it away. And one example is from 2022. I'm thinking the likelihood that you're going to stand and cheer even in your hearts is not that high, but I'm hoping you will stand and cheer in your hearts. This is a rule that extends automatic extension of employment authorization from 180 days to 540 days. People stood and cheered all over the world because there are employers who have people who are terrific, who are working, who might lose their ability to work because the processing's too slow. They got an extension of 360 more days. You see, I was a literature major rather than a math major. I struggled with that one. And the employers thought, this is fabulous. We don't lose our workers. I was working with a nation, I won't name it, a number of months ago, that has a problem with passport approvals for renewing passports, and they have a 10-year passport period. And I said, well, what if you extended it from 10 years to 11 years? What would happen? And they studied it, and they said, if we extend it to 11 years, our backlog would disappear entirely, just by going from 10 years to 11 years. This turned out to help a large number of people who are extremely vulnerable because they might not be able to work anymore, and a large number of employers who are vulnerable because they might lose their workers. Okay, here's President Biden's executive order designed to cut time taxes. And I'm going to give you some examples of what is a most unusual executive order. Typically, executive orders in my own country, and thank you for indulging my parochialism, they're very short. They say, you know, consider costs and benefits, or they say, allow this to happen, or handle climate change. There are a few pages. This one's very, very long. It requires the Secretary of State to design and deliver an online passport renewal experience. That's in place. It exists now. It was required about a year ago. The Secretary of Agriculture is directed to simplify enrollment and recertification, including expanding the use of direct certification. That might sound to you like words with lots of syllables. What direct certification means is that children who are eligible for programs that feed them lunch and breakfast for free, they don't have to apply at all. They're automatically in. If the government knows they're poor, they're automatically in. They don't have to apply at all. That is right now ensuring that millions of poor children receive lunch and breakfast for free. Farmers are eligible for loans. The take-up rate isn't high enough. The loans can change their lives. The direction is to do a simplified process. The Department of Health and Human Services, we have a doctor in the House, at least one I know. The Department of Health and Human Services is directed to do, just take this slide, to be approximately 10 things to make our health system work better by reducing sludge. eliminating face-to-face interview requirements, the magic word, pre-populated electronic renewal forms to ensure eligible individuals are automatically enrolled in benefit programs. They don't have to apply at all. Are you ready for my favorite slide? Not only my favorite slide today, but my favorite slide in the history of slides. Here's my favorite slide in the history of slides. That's my wife, Administrator Power. She's the head of USAID, which is on the front lines in Gaza, in Pakistan, in some countries very near here, and its goal is to deliver aid, including food and emergency services, to people who are really vulnerable, including from disasters. Here's what the President says to Administrator Power: shall review and revise as appropriate regulations, forms, instructions, or other sources of guidance relating to the application for grants and cooperation in countries to ensure, and this is behavioral science in operation, policies are clear and intelligible, do not contain unjustified burdens or excessive paperwork, and do not place undue burdens on local organizations and underserved communities. Can I tell you a little inside story about this? This is slightly sensitive, so please don't tweet about it. It's not classified. I'm not going to go to jail. Slightly sensitive. So any executive order in the United States government, I'm sure it's the case here also, there are a lot of people who are involved in working on it. It's not like the head of a nation writes all these words. It's written by lots of people, and it takes sometimes weeks, sometimes many months. This one took many months, and I had some involvement in this, and this part about USAID I definitely had involvement with, but I wasn't the important person who had involvement with it. The important person who had involvement with it is the head of USAID. And I talked to her about this in advance, and we made sure that she liked it and thought it was good. When the executive order circulated to the various parts of the government to see if they had comments, some people from USAID came back and wondered whether this was too specific and too directive, and the White House called me to say USAID is worried about the specificity of this. And I could answer, USAID is not worried about the specificity of this. They like it, because the boss was in favor. Okay, here's the Office of Management and Budget on paperwork reduction and equity. Psychological costs are important to consider. Remember those students at the university suffering from depression and anxiety? They impose barriers or delays that exceed those that can be measured by exclusively examining the time or financial cost experienced by the respondent. And I'm thinking that this is language and words, but there's real poignancy to this, isn't there? There's emotion behind these sentences. Such costs, if not understood and addressed, can create a barrier to gaining access to benefits that people are eligible to receive. Activities like comprehending a notice or searching a website are key to the experience. The Department of Homeland Security very recently imposed a 20 million hour challenge, saying we are going to reduce 20 million hours in paperwork burdens. That's extraordinarily ambitious, given the total is in the vicinity of 180 million, cutting over 10%. Here's from the White House recently, 203 million hours in 2021. DHS interacts with the public in a range of circumstances. The idea is to improve customer service. A department-wide 20 million hour burden reduction initiative, with every sub-agency committing to find ways to reduce the burdens by 10%. As of June 1, 2023, basically the day before yesterday, over 20 million burden hours were eliminated on the public. I received a note not from the person I told you about, but someone who asked for a green card for herself, a green card which would allow her to travel internationally and come back. And I gave the answer which I hated giving, which is I can't help you, but we do have this initiative, we're really trying. And 3 weeks later she said, I got my green card. What is happening at the Department of Homeland Security? The Transportation Security Agency introduced online renewals for a program for workers who need access to maritime facilities and vessels. They don't have to go in person. They can just do it online. Federal Emergency Management Agency helps disaster survivors. There's potential cruelty in the process by which disaster processes are too arduous for disaster survivors to navigate. Okay, to tell you a few stories, I'll tell you another story. I met with someone who helps run the disaster response process in the federal government. About 70 years old, he's been doing it forever. And he says, I've seen neighborhoods where there are people who've experienced flooding and they get the resources they need in 2 months. And there's next door people who get nothing. And then he started to cry. Said these are people who are extremely vulnerable, their property's been flooded, they get nothing. And he said, we have to fix this. This, and 70-year-old guy, to see him, this was online, in tears and barely able to talk. He was part of the team that did this so that it's just much easier for survivors to get the help they need. 2.8 million hours in burdens were eliminated by creating a simple feature for fires where everything just gets easier for people. Okay, I'm basically done with this presentation. Here's the epilogue. What is the most precious thing that human beings have? If you had to answer that question, what would you say? You gave one that might fit with the proposed answer here. As COVID recedes, and many of us, I know, including people in this room, have either suffered COVID badly or lost a loved one or know a friend who's lost a loved one. We all fall in one of those categories. The answer maybe that cries out loudest is a 4-letter word, time. Let's find, shall we, ways to give people more of that? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cas, for your wonderful presentation. It's a very current affair in Argentina, and I think we have a lot of things for discussing about the application of sludge in our context. So we think about the idea of having a panel, a discussion panel, with some of researchers and academics that will have a talk with Cas about this, the implication of sludge in our context. So I will introduce the discussants. Here we have 4 people who will share with us their ideas and have discussion with Cas. Joaquín Navajas, please come here. Joaquín is a professor from the Universidad de Itela. He's a researcher, a physicist, but now he's working on behavioral science. He has a lot of papers about all the studies in behavioral science. Very, very interesting work he's doing in this area. Please, Diego Golombek, come here. Diego is doctor in biology. He's a researcher from the CONICET. He's a professor at the Universidad de San Andrés, and also he has a lot of work and papers published on behavioral science and behavioral applications of neuroscience and the intercross of those disciplines. María Roca, please come here. Maria Roca is a PhD in psychology, neuropsychologist, and now she's currently the director of the area of organizations, business, and corporations of Fundación INECO and INECO. Y Luis Tonelli, please come here. Is Luis here? Yes. Luis is a political scientist. He was a former director of the career of politics science in the Universidad de Buenos Aires, and now he's professor at the Universidad de Sarmiento, General Sarmiento, y the Universidad de Salamanca. So please, I will begin with a question myself. It was a very interesting thing. My first question was about the psychological tax but you have, in your presentation, responded that. I think that the emotional cost, for example, my example is on disability. People with disabilities, they have a lot of difficulties to access to care, and this is a great problem. But my question was about, most of your examples were about social support or people who need special support from the state. Our current affairs in Argentina, our discussion is not about this kind of thing, but simplification as elimination of frictions in order to give a more liberal economical situation, but not for supporting people who need. It's an intentional thing, or there is a reason that you choose social support issues. Sludge is a more important thing for poor people, and doing that may improve the situation of poor people.
Shall I project? Better? Yes? Audible? Very in the back there, the gentleman, can you hear me? I'm looking at you. Okay, so the analysis would be broadly the same, and more specifically, very close to the same, if the concern is nothing to do with social support. So if you're talking about businesses trying to start, and the amount they have to do to get permission to start is sludge full, that's a very serious problem. It may be that the business wouldn't have the same cognitive scarcity as an elderly person or a poor person would have, but it's an assault on their dignity, and it has serious adverse consequences. So the example I gave of our Department of Transportation imposing a lot of sludge before development, that's more an economic growth problem. And occupational licensing, that's also an economic growth problem. So the examples I gave were partly because they've been studied more. We have data, we have some randomized controlled trials for them, but if the imperative is to get an economy going, then to take sludge away from the sources of economic growth is a terrific idea.
Please, who wants to begin?
Thank you, Gus, for your talk and for your presentation. I really like the concept of sludge. I like it so much that I believe it's, I'm curious about the relative importance you assign to from sludge to nudge. So essentially, my question is about that. In the early days of behavioral science, where most interventions were about sending messages or interventions that could have a small impact on, it's been said and accused that behavioral science can be a little bit of like an aspirin to most of like the biggest problems of society. You think about climate change, you think about polarization, you think about extremism, and what you showed to us, I think, is very far away from being an aspirin. It thinks like a serious medical treatment. Can a sludge be the way in which you can, for example, persuade policymakers who might be skeptical to employ behavioral science in their policy making, or should we insist with nudge, or should we do both, or?
This is a great question. So in the early days of behavioral science, you could see two strategies with government. One is people who knew behavioral science wouldn't use the word behavioral science. They'd just say, well, if you want this label to affect consumers, it should look this way, not that way, or let's test which would work. And it would use words like empirical or evaluation rather than behavioral science or nudging. And then and in the United States, under President Obama, we didn't use the word nudge because it would confuse people. And we used the word behavioral science a little bit, but it started to scare people. So they thought, what is this? Is this something about manipulating people's minds? So instead, we would say, how do you encourage people to take up a benefit? And what would work? So it was very problem-oriented rather than, theory-driven. But then in the United Kingdom and in some other countries, to talk about a nudge unit or a behavioral science team turned out to be successful. And so we have behavioral science teams and nudge units here and many places, and they've been spectacularly successful. And an advantage of that is it identifies the tool that's used. I was chair at the World Health Organization of the Behavioral Sciences for Health group, and a technical advisory group, and they have a unit at the World Health Organization. That's because the director was and is very taken by behavioral science. He knows something about it. So the idea of nudging people to engage in healthier behaviors is something the World Health Organization finds very genial, and they're very alert to the diversity of nudge tools, that it could be automatic enrollment, it could be the use of social norms, it could be reminders. They're basically extremely sophisticated with that. And it's worked there at the UN. There's the Secretary General is keenly interested in behavioral science, and it's been very successful. The World Bank, as you probably know, has basically a behavioral science unit. So I think in Germany, my understanding is the idea of nudging and scared people. They thought, is this like East Germany? And so they had to do something else. I think Germany is behind, and this is regrettable. Germany is behind Argentina and the United Kingdom on this. And I say this with mischief because I love Germany, and Germany is so ahead of us on any things. If any of you is German or has German friends, Germany should not be behind Argentina and the United States and the United Kingdom on this. Come on, Germany. Not in football, but yes in behavioral science. Sludge, to my surprise, because it's concrete, it's taken off with extraordinary speed and enthusiasm. So the OECD has a sludge project that is going great and happened very quickly. The Australian government has gone big on sludge reduction. Various nations, the UAE, which has been so advanced on so many things, they are big on sludge reduction. Ukraine, in the midst of the challenges, they have an effort to reduce sludge by having basically government on a smartphone so that you can get anything through the same program. And so sludge reduction has turned out to be extremely appealing. In Rwanda, they're reducing sludge. Now, sometimes they use the word, sometimes they use the word administrative burden. It has a kind of specificity and narrowness. Nudge is an umbrella concept, and sludge is more like a thing. And I see them both as promising. If the goal is to tackle crime, let's say, you need a lot of things, including jail. Not just nudge and sludge, but yeah, completely. But the effort to introduce nudges in domains such as, let's say, environmental protection is complementary to environmental standards and air quality, things that aren't nudges. So they march hand in hand.
Gus, thanks a lot for your talk. I have a couple of short comments and a question. The first comment has to do with a language problem that I have discussed with Iván extensively, is that we don't have good words for sludge and nudge in Spanish. You know, empujoncito doesn't seem very academic. You know, and empantanamiento is a bit cumbersome. So maybe you need to help us with that, and we all need to think about right words, because it's important to have the right words in your own language. The other comment has to do with something that you did talk about throughout your talk, although you did not mention it, which is the importance of state regulations for the well-being of people, which is a very important discussion here right now, right? And I'm thinking about your previous works on rights and taxes and government regulations, which actually disembark on the notion of sludge and nudge, which is something we need to discuss now because it's on the stake in Argentina. And my question has to do with what you mentioned about doing sludge audits or implementations for policies. One is, I'm not sure we do have the right tools for doing that. Like, if I'm thinking about how to measure time burdens and look into time use surveys, which we do have very good ones in Argentina, both in the country and in the city of Buenos Aires and a couple of other cities, there is no a single question regarding how much time do you spend in paperwork or unnecessary paperwork. So we do have a methodology problem here for individuals at least. And the other problem that I wanted to ask you about is, what happens when sludge is so interwoven with culture that it is invisible? When you ask people, how much sludge do you have, how much burden do you have, and they say, well, none, this is the way things are and it's always been this way, so it's really invisible. So we have a methodological problem and a psychological problem to undertake any kind of policies for less burden, less administrative burden, and less sludge. How do we deal with those two, methods and psychology?
Great. So, and those are deep and hard questions. Let's go with the third, shall we, about methodology. So what I'm about to tell you might be in the nature of too much information. Bear with me if you would. So you'll be, I think, incredulous to hear that I'm over 50. You wouldn't believe that, would you? You'd think he's 32. When you're over 50, you're supposed to get a colonoscopy. You know about that? This is the too much information. So, this is going to be relevant to your question, believe it or not. So I went on the website of a very good hospital where my doctor works to get a colonoscopy, and they said, we don't have any appointments, call us, come back to the website in a week. I did, and they said, come back in a week. And then they said, come back in a week. So I called my doctor, who said, call my assistant. And the assistant said, on a recorded voice line, go on the website. And then I finally got through to her, and she said, call this number, you'll get a person, who said, we don't have any appointments available. And at this point, I thought colonoscopies are hard to get. At that point, I got a call from a doctor who runs about 20 hospitals, who said he was keenly interested in Sludge with respect to cancer screening, and he wanted to do a Sludge audit of colonoscopies. Amazing, yes? He was doing what I was experiencing. And he said, he asked me if I would be a co-author, and that was the easiest question I've ever been asked. Yes, I would be honored to be a co-author. So I was part of a team of about 10 people, I think, and we published the paper on Sludge audits with respect to cancer screening. And we basically did an audit in a place where there had been no effort to do that, and came up with both quantitative and qualitative measures. So what I'm thinking is to start concretely in some domain. It's very manageable, and it could be even like a 2-week snapshot. So I know some companies are just asking their employees or their customers to do an audit over a 2-week period of Sludge, and the government can do that. And there, where there's no information, you end up with a lot of information. And typically, the finding of the magnitude of administrative burdens motivates reduction. So, and you know, President Obama's phrase, better is good to know something about something. With respect to terminology, the advantage of the word sludge in English is it sounds disgusting. So, and that's positive. We want it to sound disgusting. There may be some Spanish equivalent, a word that's like some mixture that's gooey. Do you have the word gooey? And a little, you know, you don't want to step in it because your shoe is going to get terrible. But so maybe there's some word like that. Administrative burdens, Thaler and I, Richard Thaler, my friend and co-author, we joke, because I think the word administrative burdens is helpful. He thinks it's terrible because it just puts people to sleep and they don't even know that it's bad. They just don't know, they know they don't want to hear that word anymore. Whereas sludge is a little bit seductive. So there must be some Spanish word like that. On regulation generally, this is something I'm sure I like too much, but cost-benefit analysis, even if of a you know, not completely rigorous kind, can often tell you that this regulation is great or this regulation makes no sense. So under President Obama, at one point, there was one environmental regulation that involved mercury and another environmental regulation that involved ozone. And the environmental groups loved them both. It was like a romance between the environmental groups. They wanted to marry the ozone regulation, but they wanted to sleep with the mercury regulation, or they wanted to sleep with the ozone and marry they loved them both very much, and they couldn't decide which they loved more. But if you looked at the ozone regulation, the net benefits were zero. And if you looked at the mercury regulation, the net benefits were in the billions of dollars. And the net benefits were because the ozone regulation would cost an enormous amount of money, and the health benefits were not in excess of the cost. The mercury regulation would cost a lot, but the health benefits were so high. So to do the mercury regulation was, according to the technical people, a really excellent idea, and to do the ozone regulation wasn't a good idea. And I'm hopeful that the current government will be very careful to make sure that the regulations that are maintained have benefits in excess of costs, and the regulations that are eliminated don't. And an effort to see whether a regulation which has a romance with certain people is actually justified in terms of its welfare effects, that can be get the economy going. There's something, history, even relatively recent history, often seems like the time of the Greeks, but in 2009, 2010, 2011, the United States was at risk of a depression. In Washington, D.C., the stores were closed. You'd see all the stores, it looked like a depression in Washington, D.C., 2009. And the fear was unemployment, everything was getting worse. It was terrible. And the idea of imposing a lot of regulations then, that's not what the president wanted to do. He wanted the economy to grow. And that meant being very disciplined about new regulations was essential. And there was an effort. President Obama, it's not in the history books, but in some ways he was the great deregulator. He wasn't only the great deregulator. He created, the Affordable Care Act and financial regulation to reduce the risk of another recession, but he deregulated a lot. I think one reason that's not in the history books is the deregulation he did proved to be sensible and not controversial. So it didn't end up in the newspapers, but he took away a lot of foolish regulations. In fact, it resulted in the worst line in a State of the Union address. There was a regulation that required milk producers to face the same regulation when they shipped milk as oil producers, because milk was defined to include, oil was defined to include milk. It's crazy. So we took the regulation away, and in the State of the Union address, he said, people won't have to cry over spilled milk, which was a little bit funny. Thank you for laughing, but it wasn't as funny as the president hoped. But that was the only one that became famous.
Again, thank you, Gus, for your presentation. I'm María Roca, and I work in INECO Organizaciones. We provide services on mental health and neuroscience to companies. So my question is, do you think that the sludges that you described are the same in companies and in public policies? And then I have a desperate proposition for all of us, that it's to audit the sludges in research and publication. Actually, I think we are all researchers here, and there's a problem there. I'm sure we all experience. So those two questions. First, companies, and then what do you think about the sludges in research and publication?
It's completely fantastic. So I do surveys, and this is probably true here also. To do surveys, you need permission. Yes, from an ethics board. And I was told by an economist who really knows that certain kinds of surveys I didn't have to get permission for, that they would be exempt. And I did those surveys. And then a year later, I got a letter from our ethics board saying, we heard you're doing these surveys. You don't have permission. And I said, I was told by someone trustworthy that I didn't need it. And they said, you were told wrong. And I didn't get in terrible trouble because I didn't publish any of the results, but I had to go through the process. And it is excessive, the level of, my belief is it's excessive. And so I'm completely in agree with you. Have some of you noticed that to review a paper, to be a peer reviewer, the number of clicks you have to do and the number of amount of information you have to enter is so horrible. So to be a peer reviewer, it's not the most fun way to spend 2 days. And to be a peer reviewer, to have to go through, there has to be a better way. So agreed entirely. Thank you for your work on mental health. The urgency of this is impossible to overstate. And I would want data to know the difference between private and public companies. Can I tell you, Daniel Kahneman, one of my heroes and my co-author, was interviewed not long ago, and he was asked a series of questions to which he kept answering, I don't know. And the interviewer got a little frustrated by him and said, what do you mean you don't know? And he said, it's an empirical question. I don't have the data. So I have up on my office door, quote, it's an empirical question and I don't have the data in huge letters. And so that's the right answer to your question. But impressionistically, let's say, private companies often impose a great deal of sludge for people to get mental health help for mental health problems. And I'm sure you would know this is a cruelty because there's sometimes a stigma associated with it, and to impose a feeling of indignity, that would not be ideal.
Well, there are two people today working in Argentina. One is President Milei, Milo in English, and the other is Cas. So thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. For me, it's like to receive the visit of Santa, the Three Wise Men, and Madonna, or perhaps the Madonna, together. And I am a political scientist. Well, sludge is the way that the bureaucrats try to show us that they are working. And in Argentina, this revolt that we are living now it's also a revolt against sludge. It's liberal in this sense, but I would like to bring another book of you that is going to streams, and ask you about this mix that in Argentina we are looking, that it's a combination of intolerance and polarization with a sort of impotence, sense of defeat in the society that, make a sort of passive agreement of these measures and these decisions from the president. If you are kind of answer this.
Okay, well, I'm speaking I'm here as a grateful guest, and I'll tell you a story, shall I? I'll tell you two stories from the last 24 hours. The first story is my wife and I went to lunch yesterday, and I left my credit card at the restaurant. And when we were about maybe 80 meters from the restaurant, running behind was our waiter, who says, "Here's your credit card." And my wife, who's been here as long as I have, that is about 48 hours, said, "Everyone here is like that." And meaning generous. And when he was running to present my credit card to me, he was smiling. He wasn't saying, "You're stupid." he was saying, "Here's your credit card." And there's a point to this in a moment. And then the other tale is my son is in a tennis tournament, and for the tennis tournament he needs a credential, and there are a lot of people at the tennis tournament, and he lost his credential. It was on the floor in a big building. And I looked for it and couldn't find it. And some people who were seeing me looking for it asked what I was doing. And then they all started helping. And it was amazing to see strangers helping scour a floor to find a 14-year-old boy's credential. And this, to see this in a big, how many cities in the world are people helping strangers like this? Not in New York, not in Paris. I mean, I love New York and I love Paris, but it's just not like that. So this is just anecdotes about the spirit of Argentina, and then as an observer of the country over the last, decades, what you've been through. And for all the challenges the country faces now, it's a shining star that things are as they are now compared to where they've been at times over the last decades. As a newcomer, any new government can go in a good direction or a less good direction. I'm hopeful that we're going to see a lot of good things. We'll see. I have no political position with respect to Argentina, and that was, I think that was China intervening in my conversation. But high hopes that accommodations will be reached and that some of the challenges will be much less serious in a year from how they are now. Maybe that's not so. I can say with any new government, there's a lot of learning, and even if people are confident, they're a little timid and scared. At least this is I was in the Reagan administration in the early days. I was in the Obama administration in the early days and the Biden administration in the early days. There's, uncertainty and humility. And so we'll see.
Great. We are coming to the end. We could be talking about these interesting things all the evening, but we will let you through the city and have a nice day before this moment. So before closing, we want to make you a humble acknowledgement. At INECO, as an organization, we work together with a university, University Favaloro, that is the university created by the most recognized physician of Argentina, is René Favaloro, who was the creator of the bypass technique at UPenn. He worked there and then came here to do a great work for social medicine, so he's a hero from our country. He created the university. We worked together with that university. So we wanted to give you a very humble diploma as an honoris causa professor of the university. You have a lot of PhDs on doctorates. This is just to remember us because we are very, very grateful that you've been here sharing your time. So I will give you the diploma. So thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm very touched and honored. Thank you.
Okay, we're finished. Thank you very much, Cass. So, gracias a todos por estar aquí un 29 de diciembre, ¿no? Agónico, pero bueno, creo que valió la pena y muchísimas gracias a todos y feliz año. Take a photo up there with all the panel, please. Think about that. We're going to do some crowdsourcing on